You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Raise your hand if you're ready to finally stop taking work home with you and actually start taking a lunch break. Or spend more time helping students, the reason you got into this profession, and less time doing stuff like bus duty. And if you're ready to finally use data to showcase the importance of your program and the progress your students have made. If any of those things sound like you, then I have got the ultimate solution for you, and that is my stress-free school counseling course. Now you may be thinking, wait, you've talked about this before. I have. So my stress-free school counseling course used to only be launched a few times a year, but now it is available all year long. And it is at a discounted price. This is perfect if you're the counselor who wants to work through it at your own pace. If instead of going through with a cohort and doing things together, you want to get to it when you can because you have a busy schedule. But first, let's see if you're even the right fit. Does this sound like you? You're a new counselor who wants to get started on the right track and not make mistakes and then redo things later. Or maybe you're a veteran counselor and you're feeling burnt out. Or maybe you're just a counselor who feels overwhelmed and stretched too thin. It's so hard to do all the things at once. Or maybe you're a counselor determined to change your program from reactive to proactive. Well, you're in the right place. Stress-Free School Counseling is totally for you. It's a 5-module digital course. So what that means is you get to watch video modules of me talking to you, just like I do here on the podcast, and teaching you in different areas like scheduling, organization, data collection, advocating for your role, and handling pushback. If this sounds like something you may be interested in, if you're a lifelong learner and can't wait to improve your counseling program, you're going to love this. And of course, it's stress-free. Head over to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/enroll to get started today. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. I hope you are having an amazing week, and I cannot wait to share today's episode with you. But before we jump in, I want to read a listener review of the podcast. So your reviews mean the world to me. It's a great way to spread awareness so we can share it with other counselors. So I would love if you could go over to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a review. That would be awesome, and you may even hear yours shouted out on the podcast. Also, if you like an episode, if this one resonates with you or you're like, ooh, this was really helpful, grab the link and send it to a counselor friend. So, at your next counselor staff meeting or whatever, or just shoot them a text or an email and say, hey, you might like this one. I found it super helpful. Because the more counselors we can help, the better. Okay, so for today's review, I have Jen. And Jen said, best school counseling podcast. Every school counselor needs to listen to this outstanding podcast. Rachel shares extremely helpful information and tips that are practical and applicable. I'm returning to school counseling after 9 years, and this podcast has really helped prepare me. Thanks for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, Rachel. Oh, thank you so much for the kind words, Jen. I love to hear that this is for counselors of all levels. So whether you're brand new, you've been in the game a while and are just looking for some new ideas, or if you are a long-term counselor and you just kind of want to hear what I have to say. Either way, I'm so happy you're here, and thank you for listening. Okay, guys, so today I want to wrap up our individual counseling series by talking about, you probably guessed it, data collection. Now, don't tune me out just now. I know I talk about data collection a lot, but I really want to share this with you because I'm going to be giving you some concrete examples so you can grab a notebook, write these down, and then use them with your kiddos literally today. So let's go ahead and dive in. I have 3 data collection tools that I want to share with you. Now, first up is self-assessment. Now, you may have heard me talk about self-assessments before because they're just so dang simple and effective. Now, what a self-assessment is it is basically a pre- and post-test survey that you're giving to your students to find out how they feel about their own counseling progress. So, how I like to do these, and I mentioned this a little bit in the beginning in the first episode of this month where I was talking about planning your counseling sessions. So if you haven't heard that one yet, I recommend that you go back and listen to it first and then hop over here. But basically, when you're building a self-assessment, you want to go through and match each question with an objective that you're going to meet during your counseling sessions. So I'm going to break it down for you really clearly here. Like I said, take some notes so you can then modify these and use them with your own kiddos. But if you're doing one on, for example, let's say self-control. So you're going to have a self-control self-assessment, and you're going to be asking questions that you're then going to teach them through the counseling sessions. So for example, if one of the sessions you're going to go over coping strategies, a question on the self-assessment could be, I can name 3 self-control coping strategies, or I can name 3 things to do when I'm feeling out of control to help me calm down. You can phrase it depending on the age of the child that you're working with. So you're going to have one to match each objective. The reason we do this is because we want the student to be successful. So when I used to first start making self-assessments, I would ask the students these questions like, I know how to stay in control. I know what self-control is. I know self-control coping strategies, whatever. And then we would have our sessions and I would feel like they were great. And then I'd send the self-assessment again at the end and the kids wouldn't know anything. And I'm like, wait a minute. But it's because I wasn't intentionally writing them to go in conjunction with my objectives. So you want to make sure what's covered in that self-assessment will be taught to the child. That way, afterwards, you can make sure, you can measure their progress. You can see, hey, I taught this to them. So did they learn it? Are they using it? Or are they still kind of confused on what this is? So I'm going to read you the examples and then we'll talk about how you can use this information. So if I have a self-control self-assessment, I'm definitely going to have some directions at the top that say something like circle the answer that best fits. Be honest, there's no right or wrong answer. Now I love to include that part because kids see these and they're like, oh, it's a quiz. I don't want to get anything wrong. But you want to encourage them. There's literally no right or wrong answer here. We're just trying to see what you know. And it's okay if you don't know any of this because you haven't learned it yet. And then I have a space for them to put their name and the date. Now, the date's so important. I've definitely left this off before. It makes it real tricky because you definitely want to know the difference between your pre one and your post one. Now, some example questions could be, I know what it means to have self-control. Yes or no? Now, I like to put yes, maybe, or no because a lot of times the kids are selecting maybe. I know which coping skills help me control my outburst. I can control my physical outburst. I can control my emotional outburst. I can identify appropriate replacement strategies. I demonstrate self-control at home. I demonstrate self-control at school. So that's an example of one. Now, you can do a print version. That's what I used to always do. But then recently I switched over to a Google Forms version and I absolutely love it. And here's why. One, because by the kids filling it out, you get timestamps. So even if you do forget to put that date, it's still going to document the time. But I do encourage you to put that date on there. But the best part is you can easily see the results. So there's that results tab on Google Forms, and you can then export it to the sheet, a Google Sheet, and you can see there exactly how they've progressed. And then you can even, when you click the results tab, it even shows you like cool graphs and pie charts. So you can see it in a pretty way how the student has progressed since they've started your counseling sessions. This is information that you can use later on in a visual way, which I'll talk about in a bit. So the benefits of doing a self-assessment are that you can see where the deficits are, if there are any. So you can go through and see, oh wow, the student said they know what all of these things are now in the post self-assessment, except these 2 areas. So maybe they didn't understand those 2 areas, or maybe you didn't teach it very clearly. So then you can go back and review that with them. If you're still getting a lot of no's on the post self-assessment and you're confident that you presented the material in a way that was easy to understand for the child, maybe they need to have continued services. So this is where you can use the results to assess how they need to move through the tiers. So if you're seeing them individually, do they need a little less support? Maybe they can benefit from a group because they still need something, but not quite that individualized attention. Or maybe they've progressed so much you think they're ready just to go back to that general tier 1 class lesson setting, or perhaps they're not showing any progress and maybe you're not the right fit. Maybe you need some more support. So maybe you could recommend them to outside services, meet with parents and teachers and see what the best next steps are. So that's how you can use a self-assessment to best support your students. Okay, so for the second one I have, it is a student rating scale. So these are really cool because a self-assessment you're using twice. You're using it at the beginning of services and at the end of services. So you're getting like a complete understanding of everything that you covered during that time, what they understand. And this is more of like an objective form. So you're not really asking the student how they're feeling, you're asking them what they understand from what you learned objectively. So can you name these coping strategies? Can you name people in your support system? Things like that. Now, a student rating scale is a really cool way to find out how the student's feeling day to day. So you can do these a few different ways depending on topic. An easy way to do it is just to have a scale of 1 to 10, and the kids can color in where they're at on the scale of 1 to 10. But you can make these creative and pretty. So for example, I like to use like big block font so the kids can color in the actual numbers. Or if it's like growth mindset, you could do a tree and they can color up to the point on the tree. If it's grief, I like to use like a roller coaster analogy because grief changes every day. So you could use ups and downs, have them draw the points and then connect them using a ruler. So there's a lot of different ways you can get creative on this. But the one I'm going to use for an example today is again for self-control, and it's using the numbers. So you're just going to have the student's name, again the date, but this time you're going to have the date for each session. So they will be completing this rating scale at the start of every session. So whereas the self-assessment is just twice, this is going to be at the beginning of every session. So they can do feelings check first and then this, or vice versa, however you want to do it. But they're going to come in, write the date, and then color in on the scale of 1 to 10 how they're feeling. So I do want to encourage you to use directions that say something like this. Color in the number that best describes your self-control today. Be honest, there's no right or wrong answer. Or that best describes your anger level today, or your grief today, or your self-esteem today. You can use this with anything. So maybe they're saying, ooh, I feel really in control today. I've made great choices. I'm going to be a 9. But then maybe the next session, they're a 2. Now, it's really cool. Again, encourage them, no right or wrong answer, but you can reflect together and see, hey, what changed? What's going on this week? I notice you've been, over 5 all week, but then you were a level 2. You felt like you didn't have strong self-control. What's going on? Or maybe, oh, your anger seems to be pretty low, this last month, but then this one week it was really high. Was something going on? So again, it's just another way to dig deeper, because the thing we don't want to do in individual sessions is just sit down with nothing and say, so how's it going? Because that's not really going to get you far. That's basically like the dinner table talk where the parents ask the students, what did you do at school today? And then they don't say anything, right? So they need that coaxing, they need that encouragement. So it's important to say, to notice these trends with them, and it helps them self-reflect too, right? They're like, oh, you're right, that is kind of weird. Well, this did happen. And then you can work on it together. So I love a good student rating scale. So you would do these at the beginning of every session. Now, the last data tool I have to recommend to you is a little different because this one's not for the students themselves. It is for parents and teachers. And this is, I call them behavior progress monitoring forms or behavior surveys. So you can call it whatever you want, but basically you're finding out the student's behavior. So what this form would look like is you would have the topic. So in this case, we're using self-control. You would have the student's name, the rater's name. So the rater is the person who's completing the form. And then the rater relationship. So is this a parent, a teacher, another guardian? Who is this person? And then the date. Now this one, again, is going to be given at the start of services and at the end of services, like the self-assessments. So you're going to have a phase 1 and a phase 2. And you want to clarify to parents that this is either before counseling or after counseling, and have them highlight or circle, and of course date when they're filling this out, so you can then use it to compare. Now for this one, it's going to be asking the parent or the teacher about the student's behavior. And like I mentioned last week, I love to get this full perspective of both parent and teacher, because oftentimes kids act really differently in different settings, and this is really important information for us to know. So some examples. You would have a chart that says never, rarely, sometimes, often, or almost always. So this is a scale. So if you can again do this one in Google Forms, is a great way. I find this is good because you can get a lot more responses, right? Sometimes you send a paper home in the backpack and then it just disappears into that black hole. So if you use a Google form, you can just text or email the parents a link and you're more likely to get a quick response. And again, using that results tab, you can see all your data in a really concise visual way. So some items that you could include would be demonstrate self-control. So on a scale of 0 to 4, never, rarely, sometimes, often, or almost always. Utilizes coping skills to manage outburst. Controls physical outburst. Controls emotional outburst. Now these might sound a little familiar because they're kind of similar to that self-assessment, right? So now, like for example, that controls physical outburst, now we're getting a full, complete picture. How does the student think they're doing on their physical outburst? How does the parent think they're doing? How does the teacher think they're doing? Are they all completely different, or are they all on the same page? Controls emotional outburst. Utilizes replacement strategies to reduce outbursts. Example, raising hand instead of blurting. Uses coping strategies to manage emotions independently. Is able to maintain composure until the appropriate time. So those are some examples of how you could do a self-control one. These forms are really helpful in gathering data. Now, I encourage you to keep it easy on yourself. You don't want to forget to send them. So if you're however you contact parents before sessions start and teachers, so when you're getting ready to schedule your sessions and contact parents to let them know or get permission, staple this to the permission slip, send it home together if you're doing the paper version, or in that email where you're saying, hey, I'm about to see your child for services. Can you please complete this before we get started? These are super duper helpful. And once I started using them, it was just like a game changer. I love seeing these results. So you might be thinking, okay, like you kind of sold me on the data. I see that it's helpful and I have it all, but now what? Well, there's a couple things you can do. So I encourage you to get your results and showcase them on a data wall. So a data wall or a bulletin board is something you can put up in your office or beside your office, but I kind of like to do it in the front office or in a common area, a high traffic area. That way parents and teachers can see it. This is where you get a chance to brag about your program and to show all the awesome things you're doing. Now, I've talked about data walls before. They do a couple things. One, they bring, awareness and kind of a pat on the back to that profession and counseling, but also they let parents know the services we provide and they let teachers know how we can support them. So they're like, oh, you're seeing students for self-control? I totally have a kid who needs that. They might not even know that that's something that you can provide for them. So I love using a data wall or a little bulletin board to showcase your progress. That's something you can kind of update throughout the year. Obviously, you want to keep everything anonymous on there. No student information will be shared. And you can do an end of the year report. So I love my end of the year reports. I'm always talking about them. And I know it is February, it's not the end of the year yet, but you want to begin with the end in mind and kind of think about how you can start preparing for that end of the year report. So you want to gather all these graphs, all this data, get it really organized. So then at the end of the year, you can have an awesome comprehensive report to showcase to your admin, maybe even to your superintendent, and to show them, hey, this is the awesome changes that our counseling program did this year. This is great because, you might be in a position where the program can get more funding or where they're thinking of hiring more counselors. So you really want to show how powerful the program is. And you're thinking, okay, I'm still on board, but that just sounds like a lot of work. Why are we doing this again? So like I said, it's for two reasons. First up, advocating. We always want to be advocating for our programs. So we want to show the importance of the profession, why there's a need for school counselors, the impact school counselors are making. We never want people to think, what's that lady do again? Isn't she kind of like the librarian? No, we have a very clear role and we want them to know what it is. And also, the best reason and the main reason we do it, why our hearts are in the profession, is to help kiddos. So this data helps us constantly improve our program. If we can find out where the deficits are and where the problems are, then we can find out how we can improve it. How can we teach this material to help the students better understand? How can we present this in a different way to help the student grow and to learn these coping strategies? How can we provide outside supports or other resources to really ensure that the student is getting the support they need? We can do all of that by looking at the data. We're not just simply guessing or shooting in the dark here like, oh, I think this will help. Instead, we have concrete evidence-based proof that we can use when we're trying to figure out how to best help students. Okay, guys, clearly I'm fired up. I love data. I hope you do too. I hope you found this whole series super helpful. If you're like, these data tools sound awesome, but they seem hard, then I have you covered. Like I've been talking about all month, I have my new individual curriculum. Inside each one, you get rating scales, self-assessments, and those behavior forms, all in print and digital versions, so you can use them however you like. So if you're interested in that, check out the link in the show notes, or you can head to my TPT store. I also wanted to briefly touch on, you may have heard me talk about it in the beginning of this episode, but my Stress-Free School Counseling course is now on sale all year long, and it has 2 modules that talk about data collection and advocating. So if you're wondering how you can use data collection more deeply in your program, if you want to learn more about this stuff on a deeper level, then I think you're really going to love it, especially if you're a visual learner. We have some examples in there. Obviously, this is just an auditory only format, so I think you would really find that Module 3 helpful. And then in Module 4, I talk all about advocating for your role, and I give you a lot of strategies on how you can use data and other areas to communicate and advocate for your role as the school counselor. So if you're interested in that, we'll link to it in the show notes as well, or you can just go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/enroll. If you're someone who wants to just learn and you're passionate about this stuff, I think you're really going to love that. Okay, guys, I will talk to you next month. Have an awesome day.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.